When it was first released, Final Fantasy VII Remake was shown to be different. It kept much of the original story from 1997 intact, but changed quite a few details to help convey its new narrative. Well, 4 years later, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has done it again, changing some details and keeping others, letting new players experience the story of Final Fantasy VII for the first time, while also giving older players a chance to see things in a different light. Today, I'd like to talk about those changes, and how Final Fantasy VII Rebirth changes the story once again. As always though, thank you to Square Enix for giving me an early copy of the game, that was very nice of them, and be warned, spoiler warning ahead. This video will spoil the events of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so don't watch this video until you've beaten it yourself. We'll be skipping around quite a bit throughout the video as well to keep things organized, which is why I recommend beating the whole thing first. I will also be referencing the prior remake in this video along with the original Final Fantasy VII, but only as it pertains to Rebirth. Any event from the team leaving Midgar to where Rebirth finishes will be discussed, anything after that point will not be. I know many people are experiencing this game for the first time through these remakes, and I would hate to spoil things for you. But if you enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, as here on the channel we talk about everything story. From informative story explanation videos to full-on critiques and analyses on a variety of games and series. Without further ado though, let's get started. So the first few chapters are actually quite faithful to the source material, most notably the chapters within Kalm and Nibelheim. Before that happens though, the game surprises you with a quick playable section as Zack Fair. Zack was the protagonist of the game Crisis Core, and while I won't go over his entire story as it's ultimately not necessary, all you need to know is that he was supposed to die at the end of the game. However, in this timeline, he is now alive. But there is a lot more to Zack than the game is letting on that can't possibly be talked about just yet, so we'll have to return to this scene later and continue on. As mentioned, the Kalm and Nibelheim chapters are pretty similar when compared to their original counterparts. The crew still talks about Cloud's past with Nibelheim, and the chapter itself still has Sephiroth uncovering his origins and taking it out on the town. What was added was a conversation between Aerith and Tifa after the retelling, where she talks about Cloud's story and how Tifa never saw him in Nibelheim that day. Sephiroth also appears and tries to convince Cloud that this Tifa isn't real since he saw her die back in Nibelheim. This is something that persists throughout the story before it eventually reaches a head at Gongaga, which we'll circle back to later. The snake before reaching Junon has also been altered, forcing you to fight it rather than run away, with the snake still being impaled at the end. The reason for the change is likely due to Sephiroth already appearing and thus already showing his strength to the party, whereas in the original the party has yet to meet him, so it was meant as a way to show how powerful he is. The next place the party ends up is the town of Junon, which would then lead into a brief encounter with a young girl Priscilla who's attacked by a monstrous sea creature. In Rebirth, Priscilla is still present, but the unlucky victim this time is everyone's favorite ninja, Yuffie. First seen in Remake's post-launch intermission episode, Yuffie is a ninja from the nation of Wutai. In FF7, Yuffie was one of the two party members that the player could miss, as she only had a chance to spawn during random encounters in forested areas, and even then you had to beat her and say the right lines to get her to join. Here, the game forces Yuffie to join, although not for a long time, as they let her operate on her own for a few chapters before eventually asking to tag along. Something noticeably missing from Rebirth is the nation of Wutai. You were originally able to go to Wutai during the story as an optional chapter, only to have Yuffie steal the group's materia if she was in your party. This led to a long goose chase throughout the level, which ended up with Yuffie and Elena, one of the newest members of the Turks, being captured by Don Corneo, only to be defeated and thrown off the statues they were fighting on. Wutai also has a separate challenge for Yuffie only, where she has to fight various members within the nation's pagoda, including Godo, the elder of Wutai, who is also her father. Yuffie was ashamed of how weak Wutai was and how they lost to Shinra. She always wanted her father to stop taking it lying down and to get back out there and fight Shinra again, but her father never listened to her. She resents him because of this and despises the man that he became. Through the trial though, the two earn a great deal of respect for each other, and Godo realizes that Yuffie's outlook on life is what Wutai needs. She is both incredibly strong but equally determined to gather materia for Wutai, and Godo had lost sight of that determination after the war. Wutai and Yuffie's entire chapter are completely absent from Rebirth, seemingly due to how they decided to portray her this time around. The extra episode with her in Remake showcased her meeting with Avalanche, as well as her hatred for Shinra, not just because they went to war with Wutai, but because they also killed their partner Sinan. This gives Yuffie more reasons to team up with the group and take down Shinra and Sephiroth. As for Wutai, its removal from the story seems to be due to how the remakes are establishing a war between the two groups. Both Wutai and Shinra were at odds with one another, something we saw develop during Crisis Core. But in the original, only the aftermath was seen through the player's eyes, such as hearing Wutai's thoughts on Shinra and what they did to their nation. The remakes have added that in this timeline, the ceasefire between the two nations would be broken, causing the fires of war to restart. It all starts here in Junon, with a conversation between Rufus and a representative of Wutai called Colonel Glenn Lodbrok, someone Rufus killed but who is now surprisingly alive. Colonel Lodbrok is a playable character from Final Fantasy VII's mobile titles First Soldier and Ever Crisis, who was handpicked to be a part of the Soldier program. From what we know, he was sent on a mission that eventually failed and subsequently led to his defection. From there on, he would find other Shinra dissenters from all walks of life to ask for their allegiance. These included Wutai, which there were many of, as well as the soldier program and those who served in the Republic of Junon, who wanted to get back at Shinra for taking their land. He, along with a Viceroy Saruf, would then start an interim government in Wutai, promising to take the fight to Shinra and reclaim the glory that Wutai had lost under its previous leadership, which most citizens seemed to support, including Yuffie. But due to the rules of the ceasefire, conflict could not be started, that is until Rufus fired the Junon cannon, something that the colonel deemed to be an act of war. Wutai also sent members of its army to the Nibelheim reactor before they were ambushed by members of the Shinra army. That's when the colonel announced a call to arms on a national broadcast, telling his allies and those of the SRC or the Shinra Resistance Committee to rise up and take the fight to Shinra. It's revealed towards the end of the game though that Colonel Lodbrok has been a Sephiroth clone in disguise, as Sephiroth himself is seen talking to Rufus before vanishing. As we know, Sephiroth can use these clones to carry out his bidding while he hides in the shadows away from the world. So it's fair to assume that this was Sephiroth the whole time, and that he sparked the war between Shinra and Wutai on purpose. It's a rather interesting change and makes me wonder how this war is going to affect our party and what Sephiroth's end goal is here. The war never restarted in the original, and he seemed to be content with not resparking the conflict again, so I'm curious as to how these affect his plans as well as ours. Part 3 will likely delve into this more though and make it part of the main plot, which would also give us an excuse to visit Wutai again, so it being cut doesn't mean it's lost for good. Mt.Corel, and by extension Barrett's backstory, is another chapter that is also very similar to the original. It still showcases how Corel changed from coal mining to Mako reactors, how that same Mako reactor blew up, how Shinra blamed it on the townspeople and killed them, to even how Barrett got injured and needed a prosthetic, as well as the news that someone shot up the gold saucer. Given how personal this story is, I'm glad to see that none of it was altered, as you really can't change perfection. Dine and Barrett both complement and contrast each other quite well. Both were wronged by Shinra, both were armed with weapons of destruction, and both acted out in aggressive and unethical means. Dine shooting innocents at the saucer, and Barrett getting innocents killed near the reactors, even if that wasn't intentional. The difference is that Dine wants to destroy the world, the towns, the cities, and everyone involved. Barrett recognizes that there isn't any point in saving the world if no one is left to enjoy it. The only real change is how the battle between the two ends. Each version of Barrett still gets a chance to talk to Dine, but Dine is noticeably more hostile in the original. Barrett tried to help him recover by telling him that Marlene was still alive and that he could go back to his daughter again. Dine refused, telling Barrett that he'd rather reunite her with his wife in death. Dine in Rebirth is pissed at discovering Marlene is alive, as he sees it as an attack on himself, that Barrett not only took his life from him with the reactor explosion, but also took his family by raising his daughter. He does, however, sacrifice his life to save Barrett from Shinra instead of jumping off the cliff to his death, ultimately ending on a somber note no matter what version you play, with Barrett realizing that he needs to be strong if not for the people's sake then for Marlene's. Interestingly, the real change in the Corel chapter has nothing to do with Barrett, but rather happens before the party even makes it to the mountain. At one point, a cutscene from Shinra HQ will play, where they hear about numerous energy spikes appearing throughout the world, which they believe to be the weapons. These weapons, as the name suggests, are weapons of the planet that only appear when the planet is in grave danger. This reinforces Barrett's actions in blowing up the reactors, proving that Shinra really was sucking the planet drive into Mako. This is way ahead of schedule. If the remakes were following the games to the letter, we wouldn't hear or see any mention of the weapons until the third game after the team confronts Sephiroth at the northern continent. But they seem to be making an appearance now due to the Whispers, which is something we'll have to discuss in the Gongaga section. During the Mt.Corel chapter, the team takes a detour to the Gold Saucer, which is where they meet their next member of the party, Cait Sith. The remake adds quite a few changes to Cait Sith and his origins though. In the original, Cait Sith, as far as the party was aware, was a talking cat with a pet Moogle, and given they already had a talking dog with them, it wasn't too out of the ordinary. Only to learn though that Cait Sith was actually a Shinra employee named Reeve controlling the cat from his office, who was sent to spy on the team and grab the keystone, which they would then use to open up the Temple of Ancients. In Rebirth, Cait Sith comes clean about him being a Shinra employee, but they all believe him to be a 9-to-5 jobber, not a higher up in the company. Rebirth also has a short cutscene where Reeve edits the photos of Avalanche that can give Shinra the slip, with another copy of Cait Sith in the background, hammering home who the real mastermind of the cat is. Both of them did have their moments when everyone thought Cait Sith was a spy, except in the original it was only occasionally and dismissed right away, whereas Barrett never lets an opportunity pass to call him out here in Rebirth. However, once Cait Sith is caught, he asks to join again because he saw the way Cloud works and was inspired. He noticed that he's not fighting Sephiroth for praise or for money, he's doing it for the good of the world, and that encourages him to do better. That, unfortunately, did not get through to Cloud, so Cait Sith uses his backup plan and revealed that Marlene had been kidnapped and he's using her as a hostage to make sure Cloud and company take him along. Rebirth removes this part, still having Cait Sith betray the group, but instead takes his leave only to reappear later at the temple when they need him. As for the Gold Saucer itself, Rebirth decided to add more games to play to really give off that arcadey feel that it always had, while also expanding the date night. Not only by adding more time to each visit, but by enhancing things like the stage play, giving it more presentation and providing more interactability for the player. Jessie also makes a brief appearance via hologram in one of the plays, a callback to a conversation in Remake where she talked about performing at the Gold Saucer. And the original battle minigame that we needed to complete to get the keystone from Dio has been changed to a matchup with much more stakes. Don Corneo has come back and challenged Dio for the rights of the Gold Saucer, so we have to represent Dio and take down the Don, which is what leads to the Turks and Rufus showing up, who end up stealing the keystone anyway, continuing to still make it one of the best sections in the game. But most of that happens in the second visit to the saucer, as in between each visit were a few other areas the team visited. The first of which is Gongaga. Its claim to fame is being the place Zack Fair grew up, while also acting as another optional area within the original that the player doesn't have to visit. Here in Gongaga is also Zack's parents who you can talk to, but neither version of Cloud remembers who that is, and neither would the player, as this is the first time you hear about someone named Zack, at least in the original. With Zack playing a more pivotal role in the remakes, this conversation has much more weight, as Aerith talks to Tifa about Cloud not remembering Zack. As we saw earlier back in Calm, Tifa was talking to Aerith about Cloud's story of Nibelheim, so the two seem to be investigating how much Cloud actually knows. She also seems to seek out Zack's parents once the group settles in at Gongaga, whereas before she only learned about Zack's parents after they met. Here in Gongaga is also Cisne, a character from Crisis Core. Her main role was being one of the game's many Turks, like Rude and Reno, but was notably the one with the most humility, offering to let Zack go instead of take him in when he was ordered to be captured by Shinra. During one of these talks, Zack had asked Cisne about his folks and if they were doing alright, further asking to look after them when he leaves. It seems Cisne took that to heart, as after likely discovering Zack's body outside of Midgar, she honored his words and stayed in Gongaga, now as a leader of the town's fighting force. Her relationship with Zack is why she mistakes Cloud for Zack when they arrive, and being a former Turk connects to how she immediately recognized Cait's Sith. Out of all the chapters in Final Fantasy VII, Gongaga has to be the one with the biggest overhaul. Due to it being optional, nothing of note really occurs here, and only serves to give the player another place to stock up and gather some new materia. Although I always love the conversation here between Reno and Rude, talking about who they like, as Rude admits to liking Tifa, and if I'm not mistaken, Rude won't attack Tifa if she's in your party. This was also slightly hinted at during the remake when he pulls the chopper away when Tifa's running up the tower so Reno doesn't shoot her. Plus, Elena comes by and talks to Cloud as if he's some random bystander before realizing that it's Cloud who she's speaking to, and it really adds to the zany comedy of the game. Rebirth instead makes Gongaga one of the game's many regions, giving you a chance to explore all the different locations within its reach. What kicks off the story of this chapter is a loud noise that can be heard from the nearby reactor, which the party assumes to be a weapon. Whispers also end up appearing, making their debut appearance, at least in this game, which gives them all the reason they need to check it out. Once the boys arrive at the reactor, they're greeted by a fight with Scarlet, which forces the girls to take action and see what's going on. Amid all this, Sephiroth comes back to taunt Cloud, making him question if Tifa is real once again, before giving in and attacking Tifa, which sends her into the pool of Mako below. The way it's portrayed is similar to how Sephiroth attacked her back in Nibelheim, which is a nice touch. Tifa attempts to swim out, but is swallowed by the weapon, letting her see what's going on with the livestream. There seems to be two kinds of whispers now, the white kind, which seems to be allied with the planet, and the black ones, which are being controlled by Sephiroth. This is why the weapons were introduced earlier in the story compared to the original, as the whispers never existed back then, so there was no need for them to appear until after Sephiroth really started screwing with the planet. Sephiroth's new whispers pose a major threat to the planet, so the weapons had to be called in ahead of schedule. While in the livestream, Tifa gets to relive memories of her past, the same one she'll eventually see in the original. When that's over, Sephiroth appears and injures the weapon, causing it to swim back to the surface and letting her go, allowing the party to regroup. After Gongaga would be the village of Cosmo Canyon, but taking them there is the next party member, Cid Highwind, a vulgar yet experienced pilot. Cid used to be employed by Shinra as an engineer and rocket scientist, with the dream becoming the first man in space. But thanks to Mako, Shinra decided to pivot their efforts and move on, away from exploration to see how much they could rake in while their boots were still on the ground. His introduction was seen in the also cut location, Rocket Town. You visit this place a couple times throughout the story, with the first visit being solely focused on Cid's recruitment. And I think that's why it was cut, as Cid doesn't take up too much time in Rebirth. I have a feeling that when Remake Part 3 releases, then they'll provide more background on Cid and maybe give us a chance to see Rocket Town. Rebirth is already packed with lots of content, so they might be looking to balance things out so they have enough to use for Part 3. As such, Cid, like our next character Vincent, isn't playable in Rebirth. They're currently being given the Red 13 treatment, being shown to the player now before eventually becoming a full controllable party member in the sequel. Cid will then take the group to Cosmo Canyon at Red 13's suggestion. But Red's not just going to the canyon because of the mission, but also because it's his hometown. Established years ago, Cosmo Canyon became a small village that sticks to more traditional methods of living, using less Mako as they believe it's the planet's right to keep the resource. The village was also inhabited by Red 13 and his species, who were seen as guardians against any evil threats the village might have. One in particular was the Gi tribe, who was defeated thanks to Red 13's father sacrificing himself while the door to the cave he was in was sealed behind him. Red 13, or Nanagi, always hated his father because he thought he ran away, only to learn that his father was actually a hero. Just like Corel with Barrett, Cosmo Canyon serves a story arc for Nanaki to confront his past and his feelings while giving a chance to live up to his role in life as the protector of the village. Everything goes about the same, with Red 13 going through a trial to prove that he's capable, except at the end, one of the members of the Gingy tribe appears and escorts the group to their land. This leads to a completely new section not seen in the original, which gives us more background on the Gingy. At the time, all we knew was that the Gingy couldn't go back to the lifestream like all things should. Rebirth recontextualized this by stating that the Gingy were not born from the lifestream like the rest of the people on the planet, and you can't exactly return to a place you've never been. So they couldn't enter the lifestream and instead had their spirits placed in these statues to live here for eternity. The leader also asks our help in retrieving the black materia, as they believe it's the key to letting them pass on. The two oldest materia in the world are the black and white materia. The white materia has the power to cast the spell of Holy, which uses all the power of the lifestream to aid the planet in stopping whatever threat is attacking it, with the black materia being able to cast the deadliest spell in history, the meteor. We saw a brief glimpse of the meteor back in Remake during that presentation at Shinra HQ, and it's as dangerous as it looks. Sephiroth wants this materia so he can cast the meteor, but the Gingy want it so that they can die. According to the Gingy, they were the ones who imbued it with the desire for freedom in the first place, until the Cetra appeared, trespassed on their land, and then took the materia for themselves. So now they want Cloud and company to get it back for them. It's unclear how that black materia would accomplish that though, since its only use seems to be to cast meteor, but in a morbid way of thinking, destroying the planet would allow them to pass on completely. Like the war against Shinra and Wutai, it makes me wonder how much of a role this will play in Part 3. The Gingy tribe has now become a sort of third party in this conflict for the black materia. And seeing as our party has no plans to give this orb of destruction away, the Gingy are likely to come after us. But as it was established in this chapter, the Gingy can't leave, so how much of a threat could they actually pose? I'm very interested to see where this one goes, personally. The chapter that would follow would be our present-day visit to Nibelheim, but similar to Costa del Sol, there really isn't enough change to create a whole section for it. That said, it was discovered that Nibelheim was rebuilt as a treatment center for Mako poisoning, with many of the patients being the clones. However, this was all a cover-up, so as to hide all the work they were doing in the mansion. Inside said mansion is also where the player would meet Vincent Valentine, our last party member. But just like Sid, he has very few lines in this game, so he'll be expanded upon during Part 3. We do get to see what his limit break is though, which was more than worth it. Following this would be the second visit to the Gold Saucer, where Cait Sith betrays the group and the keystone is stolen, but thanks to Vincent, the team can track Shinra down and find the location of the Temple of Ancients. The temple is a absolutely massive level this time around, taking at least 3 hours to get through, way longer than the original. Sadly, most of the area's unique, if not infuriating puzzles are gone, but are replaced with more combat encounters and some completely original story moments. Down here on the bottom levels of the temple are a few holographic displays that explain the history of the Cetra. It also explains that Jenova came from the stars and was not a Cetra like Shinra thought. This gives the player a chance to question Sephiroth's motivations, since all of this stemmed from his belief that his mother was Jenova and that she was a Cetra, in turn making him a Cetra, but these holograms claim the opposite. Before getting here, the party also has to go through a trial where each one confronts a traumatic moment in their life. It's mainly used as a way to not only refresh the player on what the party has gone through, but also why they fight. Whether it be Shinra, Sephiroth, or both, each member has a reason to be here. Towards the end of the level is where a fascinating revelation comes in, as right when Cloud takes the black materia, the temple crumbles, forcing the group to leave. Amid the chaos and panic that ensues as the team tries to figure out what to do, Aerith casually says that it doesn't matter whether we keep the materia or not because it's fake. In the original, the materia wasn't an orb but rather the temple itself, but after solving all the puzzles it would materialize into a materia at the cost of the temple shrinking, crushing anyone inside. That's why Cait Sith sacrificed himself, since it's just a toy body. Aerith in this game seems to imply that this orb is a fake, which is rather fascinating and makes me wonder if this will ever get elaborated on. Especially since right after the temple is destroyed, Sephiroth appears and takes the black materia for himself, not only using its power to cast a spell, but one that summons the Whispers to the world. More chaos ends up ensuing as Cloud also can't control his actions, resulting in him chasing after Aerith. But what follows is what at first seems to be a lengthy dream sequence that sees Cloud and Aerith having a peaceful day off. However, it's much more than initially thought, as this is a tease of the events to come. This world is not some kind of dream that Cloud was thrown into, but rather an alternate universe, one that has a noticeable tear in the sky. The reason I say this is an alternate universe is due to what happens after, as once Cloud goes through this whole day with Aerith and is sent back to reality, he and the party make it to the Forgotten Capital where Aerith seems to have gone after leaving the group, claiming that only she can defeat Sephiroth and must do it alone. Upon arriving, instead of the twist we all knew was coming, Cloud actually manages to save Aerith, only for it to show the real fight in which Cloud had failed and Aerith is dead once again. But this fake out was not just a design made to tease the viewer, but rather a confirmation that multiple timelines exist. A bit earlier, before the team heads to the capital, Sephiroth has a conversation with Cloud where he says that after every action the planet's timeline splits in two, one where it did happen and the other where it didn't. That means that Rebirth seems to be setting up a multiverse style plot. Sephiroth's plan in the original was called the Reunion, which has to do with the robed men meeting him on the northern continent. But his reunion in the remake seems to encompass not just this world, but all of them. He wants to take every Final Fantasy VII timeline and seemingly merge them together, which would likely create an unparalleled amount of destruction. And from what he says, this event, where the worlds will merge in a reunion and where feelings of spite and sorrow feed the planet, seems to be this moment with Aerith. But this circles us back to Zack. These flashbacks we see show Zack in the Sector 5 slums taking care of both Aerith and Cloud before going out to track Biggs, who seems to have survived his fate as well. But within these flashbacks is that same streak of white that we saw in her dream. Some of these scenes also have this rainbow effect, which seems to be used as a way to convey that the timeline has split. When Zack is in the tunnels, he's stuck on what to do. Either go to Shinra HQ to find a cure for Aerith and Cloud, or go to the Sector 6 reactor to stop Biggs from blowing it up. In this scene, he picks the headquarters, only for a rainbow effect to appear in the other tunnel. But the following two scenes also show that he went to both Shinra HQ and the reactor, which doesn't make sense. What this seems to imply is that in one universe, Zack chose the headquarters, and in another he chose the reactor, creating two different timelines. There also seems to be a third choice he made, as Zack is seen at the steps of the church contemplating what to do before Sephiroth appears, conjuring the Whispers to swallow him, only to seemingly attack Aerith soon after, judging by the cutscene. Stamp the dog, a character we briefly saw in Remake, is present here in Rebirth, but packaging throughout the game seems to portray the dog as a different breed, further hinting at the existence of multiple timelines. To add to this, the rainbow effect appears once again, when Biggs is recounting the day he was going to die, which shows the scenery changing, something that also appears when Cloud talks to Aerith, as the chairs of the church disappear when the rainbows touch them. They also appear when Zack is talking about his death and how the bullet grazed him, and when Cloud saves Aerith from Sephiroth's attack. The final boss also seems to portray this multiverse through gameplay, as Cloud, Zack, and the rest of the crew are all facing Sephiroth at different points. From the way it's portrayed, it seems like they're fighting the same version of Sephiroth, a nice callback to the final fight in the original where you could swap teams and attack him with different party members. But the rainbows appear at certain points, like when Cloud is teleported to Zack, and then when Zack falls at the end of the same fight, once again implying that there are multiple timelines. Another complicated diversion from the story is the white materia. At the time, the party thought it was over and that they lost, since only the white materia could stop the power of the meteor. But they learned that Aerith's prayers did reach the planet, but it was Sephiroth himself who was blocking its power, forcing the party to kill him. In Rebirth, Aerith hands Cloud the materia right before Sephiroth appears, only to take it back once they meet in the forest. Aerith's white materia was empty, which we saw back in Costa del Sol. We know from the game that the materia is made from memories, and that the Whispers steal memories when they attack, so they had managed to drain the materia of its own power. As such, through the multiverse, Aerith had another one of her, the one from the alternate timeline, give Cloud her materia so that he could give it to our Aerith. The terror in the sky is also a sign that the world is coming to an end, so this Aerith knew that her time was up, so giving it away was her only option. This would also confirm that Aerith knows what's about to happen and that death will soon follow. Aerith's death is a vital moment not just for the story of Final Fantasy VII, but seemingly for the timeline of the planet, as while things have changed, many events have stayed consistent, such as Aerith's death, which seems to be fated to happen no matter where she goes, as evidenced by Sephiroth showing up at the church, and how in each choice except his indecision, Zack always seems to face a last stand against an army of Shinra soldiers. I guess we could call them canon events, if you will, things that seem to happen no matter what, but that does call into question if this fate could be changed, as both Zack and Aerith have different fates and what were aligned with the planet, such as when Zack was attacked by Sephiroth at the church and when Aerith lived in another timeline. It does call to wonder how fate could be changed, and how detrimental that could be for the future of that timeline. But it's time to step away from the multiverse stuff, as there is still one last scene in the game where the party walks out of the capital and onto an open plain of grass. Aerith is seen amongst the party, but only Cloud seems to notice. I don't think this has to do with any more multiverse shenanigans, and it's just plainly her in spirit form so that she could say goodbye one last time before she passes on. This does, however, allow Aerith to be more present in the story even after her death, possibly as some guiding hand helping Cloud along. Besides that, Cloud has the black materia again and imbues it into his Buster Sword. The sky has a noticeable tear in it, except only Cloud can see it, and Zack is sitting at the church wondering if worlds that split can reunite, implying that Zack might hop realities again into the one that we're in with the rest of the party. Despite that being the end though, there are still tons more changes that we haven't discussed, which is, after all, what happens when you take a roughly 10-hour section and quintuple its length. You're going to have some differences, such as how Rufus initially wanted a truce between Avalanche and him before Yuffie tried to kill him, or how Roche was infected by Hojo only to become a clone after his defeat, or how Costa del Sol has a new boss fight with Hojo which leads to Yuffie's recruitment. If we went over every single change, we'd be here for at least an hour, but I only wanted to hit the main points without making things too confusing. It's not like the changes plan on stopping anyway, as the Final Fantasy VII remakes were always envisioned to be a trilogy, and the final confrontation has yet to come. But as I said, I wanted to keep all the information out of this video as best as I could to not spoil it for those who are experiencing it for the first time. Anyone who has played the original though knows what's next and the mysteries that have yet to be revealed, all things that I'm sure will be explained in due time. For now though, that's where this game ends, and subsequently the end of this video, as this is how Final Fantasy VII Rebirth managed to change the story again. Whether these changes were good or bad was not the aim of this video, merely to highlight what was changed, but I'll leave that up to you the viewer to decide, so let me know in the comments what you think about the story of Rebirth. As always, like the video if you enjoy, and subscribe if you're new for more content like this. Remember, we cover everything story here on the channel, from analyses and critiques to strictly informative explanation videos on all your favorite games. So if that sounds interesting, please be sure to stick around and subscribe. And finally, thank you to my returning viewers for coming back to another video. Take care everyone. Goodbye.